Hello and welcome to Hudson Institute. My name is Riley Walters. I'm Deputy Director of the Japan chair here at Hudson. And today we have an excellent event called How to Make Japan's Economy Competitive. And we have a great speaker here with us today. And it's really an honor and privilege for us to host Representative Keisuke Suzuki. Representative Suzuki is a member of Japan's House of Representatives representing Kanagawa's 7th district. He was formerly the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs and State Minister of Foreign Affairs and State Minister of Finance within the Japanese government. And so what we'll do today is we'll just have a few quick remarks and then go into a Q&A and try to figure out how to make Japan's economy a little bit more competitive in this troubling economic environment we're all dealing with. So with that, Representative Suzuki, the floor is yours.
Yep. Oh, thank you, Rolly. Actually, as introduced, I'm the fifth term elected member of parliament, a lower house member, and have been a state minister of finance, foreign affairs for 2 years, by 3 years ago. And actually, thank you very much for inviting me for this very excellent event. I'm very glad to be here, and I want to say good morning for everyone. Actually, I had been in DC on 2001, and then moved to New York City as a financial attaché dealing with the forex market for 2 years after that. So for me, actually, the current station of the yen's depreciation is quite the important topic, and also the how to make the economic performance of Japan to maximize its potential, and how to make the output as potential is quite very important issue for me. And in this year, remember the assassination of the former Prime Minister Abe was a very tragic event, and since then, I was asked by many of the market participants that would it affect the procedure of the economic policy that is studied by the Prime Minister Abe, called Abenomics, or in next year, next spring, the BOJ Governor Kuroda's replacement is expected. So that and his term would end on the start of the April. So would the change of the BOJ governor could affect the monetary policy? Or many questions should be there. And at the same time, Japan is facing the shrinking size of the population, and we are now also facing a kind of the geopolitical challenge by the PLC, the People's Republic of China, or the North Korea. So I'd like to touch upon every of these topics, maybe in the following Q&A session, I think. But I think that today's title of this event, the how to make Japan strong again, is it right?
How to make it more competitive, but yeah, strength is
okay. That's a very critical, important agenda, I think. So I think that Japan is now facing like 3 traps, I think, in that context. The first trap should be the traps of the human capital, and the second trap would be the traps of the financial resources, financial capital, and third would be the traps of the Japanese traditional corporates, I think. The first one is that the human capital side. I think that the lack of the mobility of the labor force or labor market is very, very critical issue in Japan. So like the kind of lifetime employment type of the long-term employment is a kind of the how to say the common or average behavior of the Japanese laborers. And so that would lead us to the lack of the flexibility of the mobility of the labor market. And also, we have already introduced the foreign workers to Japan, especially we're focusing on it in the last 5 years, especially before the COVID-19 issue. But still, the number is limited. So we need to make this country much open for those kind of the foreign talents, I think, including the the normal average workers. And about the second traps, the financial asset or the financial capital traps, I think that it also is a kind of lack of the mobility or the flexibility of the financial capitals. So like the cross-shareholdings in Japan, or the very high level of the retained earnings, that kind of the, how to say, the unmoved money or unmoved financial capital is so huge in Japan. So we need to revitalize it. That is also the very important key for the success, I think. And the third point, the corporate stuff, is that I think that the very low rating of business entry and exit is the kind of the unique phenomenon in Japan. And it's unique in the context of the negative, I think. So of course, the stability of the firm is kind of welcomed, but at the same time, it's kind of the trade-off of the introduction of the new innovation, I think. So we need more good startups to Japanese market. And in that context, I think that the traditional firms exit would be one of the necessary piece of that, I think. Of course, if the firm's performance is good, it's okay. But kind of the zombie type of the big firms is still existing. And kind of the silly subsidies by the government sometimes make these kind of zombie companies survive for quite a long time. And those kind of frustration is seen in many levels, in the rural, urban, or the medium caps or the big caps or like that. So we need to proceed the reform, structural reform also in this context, I think. So we need to tackle the Japanese current situation by these 3 measures, mainly, I think. And the new capitalism introduced by the Kishida-san is kind of the targeting this kind of the targets, I think. So the new capitalism, some ironically said that this is a new socialism, but we need to make it not the new socialism, but new capitalism. And I think that in that context, new capitalism is a capitalism focusing on much more on the long-term returns of the corporates. And so we don't think that the market focusing on the short-term issue and overshoot it quite many times. It's not healthy situation. That is our analysis. And I think that this kind of the analysis would be shared by many of our friends in the US also. But I think that to make the market mechanism focusing on much longer term interest or longer term return is quite important restructure, I think. So we want to proceed that. And we are now trying to introduce many of the measures in that context. And also the new capitalism is focusing on how to introduce many of the startup side, not to protect the traditional big firms, but to allocate those assets for the new startups. That is the second point, I think. And also the new capitalism includes the kind of concept to monetize or make it much more business for the social sector or the public sector that is traditionally dealt with. And also as Kishida-san said, we want to accelerate the labor mobility much more. And those are the main contents of the Kishida-san's new capitalism. And I think that this would be the concept that makes the Abe-san's third arrow more deeper, I think. And so I can say that our current administration really want to try to proceed especially the third arrow, the structural reform side, to make the private sector of Japan to maximize the potential. So those are the rough picture of the current economic policy in Japan, and also the political situation in Japan. So thank you for that.
No, thank you. That was a wonderful overview, and you've touched on a lot of really important topics: population, China. A lot of people looking at the Bank of Japan, the BOJ, what's going on there, and the forex, or the foreign exchange market. Certainly, I do like that you've sort of called back to Abe's third era, though. I think in a lot of analysts' mind, that was probably the most important arrow. The structural reform. Abe's three arrows, to remind folks watching, there were three. There was monetary policy, fiscal policy, and structural reform, that being the third one. And a lot was done in that regard. And arguably more needs to be done. As you were saying, maybe new capitalism touches on that, but it certainly wasn't something that's easy. And there's a lot of headwinds, I think, that Japan has to deal with in trying to fix that issue. And so you've kind of bringing two topics together, the structural reform of, let's say, introducing more workers into the workforce, or increasing labor mobility. At the same time, Japan is seeing decreasing population. And so how do you sort of see this evolving, maybe over the next decade or 2 decades, as Japan tries to, again, introduce more workers into the workforce, but also have to deal with a declining workforce?
Okay, so well, I think that in accordance with the workforce, we would have the three kinds of measures, I think. The one is, of course, in Japan also, the female workers participant is quite accelerated. And also, I think that the participation ratio of the female workers is quite high, even vis-a-vis other developed countries. But we want more female talent back to its kind of the more senior positions, or the skilled labor, or section has the high end of the workforce. And I think that still, because since we introduced a kind of the legal climate change in that context, I think that 2-3 decades has passed, but still, that's a time frame. So that I think that in coming 10 years, more of female workers would participate for the more senior level labor force, and that would certainly accelerate the productivity in many contexts, I think. And the second point would be how can we introduce the foreign workers much more, I think. We are now facing the situation that the Hong Kong, whose freedom has gone, so that many Hong Kong's talent want a kind of the new place to go. And also in Singapore, the regulation, especially on the financial sectors, is quite becoming much tighter, and more tighter than Japanese one. So I think that we may introduce such kind of the Asian talents, and also we want to introduce many of the like American, or the European, or the African, or many good talents for Japan. And for me, I think that the hesitation for introducing foreign workers or foreign people to Japan in average normal people is now decreasing a lot, I think. So we don't have many hesitation anymore. So like basically 15 years ago, when I was the first time elected, at the time, whenever I had a town meeting or the event in urban, rural area, all out in Japan. And I think that at the time, I remember that at the time, even in urban area, only like 40% is a pro of foreign workers or like that. And in rural area, the ratio is much lower, like 20 or 30%. But nowadays, it become really the contrary situation. So especially in the rural area, because of the shortage of labor force, they understand the reality that they have to, or inevitably have to, introduce more foreign workers. And they need to welcome foreign people for their society. They understand that reality. So that in this like 4 or 5 years, when I had an event in urban or rural area, especially in the rural area, I think that even among those the conservative society, I think that like 80% is welcoming it, and in urban area like 70%. So I think that the situation has totally changed in many contexts. So I'm very optimistic that Japan would accept more and more foreign workers and open Japan for the foreign talents. And third measure would be the introduction of the AI or the robotics. I think that those kind of the shift from human labor to the other approach would help Japanese productivity much more. And I think that the limitation of the labor force could not become the limitation of the economic growth in the future, I think. So that those three is a very important measure, I think. So we would make our country much open, introducing a kind of the soft law, hard law to maximize the females workers' participation for the much higher level, and also investing for the digitalization or the DX or the AI. Those are the what is going on in Japan now.
Well, while we're still on this topic of aging population, one thing that's sort of been creeping into the news is a problem that Japan is experiencing called the succession crisis. It's one thing to not have enough labor, but it's another thing for companies which are often, very small, owned by elderly individuals who have no one to hand the company off to. And so what might be some ways you think that Japan can address this graying problem, specifically the succession problem? Is it handing companies off to more women leaders or more foreign owners, or is there a necessity for more mergers to happen for some of these small and medium enterprises, which frankly might not have a future otherwise?
Okay, so in that context, in Japan, we introduced the kind of the tax reduction frame in that context. So we want to accelerate the MA type of the solution in that context. And that is now start working, I think. And also, my perception is that, especially in the rural society, to find out the successor in those small communities is quite difficult, frankly speaking. So nowadays, the local financial institutions like the local banks or like that, they are now focusing on to make the kind of matching of the talents and cross the border of each prefecture. Those kind of the challenges now we're working on. So that I think that in coming decades, I'm very optimistic in that context. And also, I think that, of course, we need to clarify is that firm is how to say the sustainable in the context of the productivity, or do they have the future or not, or are they productive or not? So we need to clarify the character of the firms, and then make those good firms to make a successful succession is a very important key, I think.
Well, you were mentioning zombie corporations earlier. That's, I guess, in a similar sense, whether the company is actually profitable. Maybe we can get to that in a minute, but I would love to ask you real quick, since it's really it really is covering a lot of the news right now. We're seeing not just the US and other countries talk about inflation, but the Japanese yen is devalued against the US dollar to a 30-year low right now. And that does have, that coupled with inflation has an impact for consumers, particularly consumers in rural areas. What do you think? The Bank of Japan has been fighting for over a decade now to try and build Japanese inflation in a hope of creating this cycle of inflation and increasing wages and more consumption. Do you see that cycle finally coming around, or I guess really more to what the Japanese consumer is worried about? What does this mean for them as they have to spend more of their money to buy necessities, or if they're looking at importing things, paying a higher price?
Actually, I think that the core problem of that is certainly the lack of the strong structural wage hike, I think. So because, especially in the white collar people, because of the long-term employment or lifetime employment, their normal career path is like get hired in some firm after the graduation, and then work in the same place by retirement. And that is a very normal behavior of the Japanese average workers by now. But that situation is not good for the wage hike, actually. So the wage hike always happened in the labor market, right? So if one wants to change a job and he's a very talented person, maybe the next firm would really want to buy him, then pay the high salary, right? And the former firm, if one is very talented, that firm don't want him to leave, so they would pay more, right? So such kind of the mechanism would work in a normal market, but in Japan, the very low flexibility and low liquidity and lifetime employment type of the situation, that really harm that kind of the wage hike cycle. So that is a really big point, I think. So that's why I mentioned about the change of the labor market as a first trap, right? And I think that certainly in this 2-3 years, especially in the younger generation, they don't want the lifetime employment or long-term employment anymore, basically. So I think that that kind of a change of the mind of the younger people could become the trigger to change those kind of the labor custom, whole Japanese the labor market situation. That could be the trigger to change it, I think, and I hope. And I think that once those kind of the good cycle gets started, then Japan becomes the kind of the normal market-based economy in the context of the human resource and the financial resource. I think that the pressure of the inflation led by the wage hike could happen, and those kind of the demand pull type of the inflation, not the cost push type of inflation, could happen in Japan, and that is only the solution of the depreciation of the yen in this moment. Because in Japan, because of the very low mobility of the labor market or the financial market, or low productivity and lack of the structural reform, even BOJ, they cannot make a hike of the interest rate under the current situation, or even if they really want to do that, because the economic general situation is not suited for that kind of the heating type of situation.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're saying that obviously wage growth is important. For there to be wage growth, there needs to be labor turnover. But I wonder, that doesn't really sound like a short-term solution. So I'm wondering, is there talk in Japan about sort of short-term solutions? Or in my point of view, it sort of seems as if the Bank of Japan is almost it's playing a game of chicken with the US Federal Reserve, hoping that they will stop rising, the Fed will stop raising interest rates soon, so that the dollar will cease its appreciation and therefore the yen cease its depreciation. So I don't know if you have a similar sense, or if, again, there's more discussion about something more in the solution in the short term for Japanese who are dealing with rising costs and a devaluing yen.
So I think that maybe we would consider kind of the short-term solution also, but I think that the point is that the reason why currently the yen is depreciated is not only because of just a gap of the monetary policy rate, but it's kind of a gap of the growth potential of the society. And that is the core of the problem. So that we need to tackle on it. That is the primary requirement for us, actually. And but at the same time, you're right. If we start to make that kind of the change of reform proceeding in forward, we might introduce a kind of some of the practical measure in context of the monetary policy or like that. If it is accompanied by that kind of the long-term reform, it would work. So I think that we need to set up that kind of package of the short-term, long-term, mid-term solution, I think.
So going back to your three traps, the second one you mentioned was financial resources, financial capital of firms. And one of them, again, correct me if I'm wrong, this is just my own personal opinion, but it seems as though you're right, there has been an accumulation of capital within, unmoved capital within large corporations within Japan. I always sort of saw them as a term we say, building the war chest, preparing for a time for when they could use it, whether that's, at a point where they decide to make risky investments, or on the flip side, if there's ever an economic downturn, which I would argue many are seeing right now. And so I wonder if there's really a push to use those resources now, again, for new investments, for R&D and investing in human capital, or is there really a concern that the economy is just going to continue to more or less stagnate like it has for the last 10 years?
Okay, so it really depends on the attitude of those corporate managers or the corporate executives. Would they really want to take risk in that context? So always the most important piece is animal spirit of those persons, right? And I think if the circumstance, like the change of the deflationary period to the inflationary period, that could be the kind of the very big tailwind to do that. And maybe if they have kind of a strong pressure front market or the board to make that firm more productive. Those kind of pressure could be one of the solution, I think. So I think that the reason why the corporate governance type of the approach is very important is because of that reason, I think. So how to change the mind of the corporate managers or the executives is quite the important key, I think. So yeah, in our administration, I work hard on introducing the corporate governance code like that, and that will be welcomed by the foreign investors. That's, I think, that because of that story, I think. And so some firms, they now change their behavior already, so that I think that once those kind of firms get a kind of a good fruit, maybe the other would follow. So I think that kind of a good rotation, I hope that kind of good rotation would get started in near future. Yeah.
So does that, seeing success stories, is that where startups come in? Show these new innovative ideas that can be adopted for some of these older companies who, or even the smaller companies who might be either slow or risk averse to invest in new digital services, digital technology, that sort of thing. Is that what you would say?
Yeah. So I think that of course, Japanese corporate society had been the very ordered society by now, at least for last 30, 40 years, right? And so, and we want to make it much, how to say, the unordered, unexpected, plenty our opportunities type of the society, right? And there'll certainly be the transition period, I think. And in that transition period, maybe one of the approach that is very comfortable for Japanese people or the Japanese firm would be the big firm would make kind of the startup venture type of the new business inside the firm. So, and set up the new branch and select the people from the firms, our workers, to make management on that, our startups inside the firms. So that kind of mixture could be there also, and that would make the profitability of the firm much bigger, right? So that kind of the hybrid approach could be there, and also you're right. So many startups that could lead the economy also, and yeah, so those kind of mixture would be there, I think.
Well, one of the things you mentioned, we've talked a little bit about human capital and financial capital and traditional companies and sort of the domestic environment within Japan. But what about the external environment? Japan and the United States and Europe are talking more about the relationship with China and what that means for their not just economies, but national security. And so, I understand that Japanese businesses are heavily invested in China, just like American and European and South Korean companies. And so there's a lot of conversation going on about what is the future relationship with China look like? What's the discussion like in Japan on this issue? Not just maybe with your conversations with, if you talk with companies about this, but also within the Diet as well.
Okay, so our perception is that the Chinese ambition to conquering Taiwan is real, actually, especially in this third term of Xi Jinping. It's quite dangerous situation, and the reason why it might be because of his third term, the Chinese leadership became much dictatorship type of our authorities. So I think that Xi Jinping have to find out his legitimacy. And that legitimacy is traditionally supported by the delivering the people the economic benefit or wealth, or great Chinese leader type of the image. And because the Chinese population is now suddenly start to shrink, so that the first legitimacy is very difficult to deliver that. So he have to focus on a second legitimacy. And the most effective way to do that would be the Taiwan issue. So led by his domestic political situation, Xi Jinping would seriously thinking about the invasion for Taiwan. And that is our basic, and maybe it's basic unless it's also in Washington, I think. But and once the crisis of Taiwan really happens, that really harms the global economy, I think, and also the economy in East Asia. Of course, with Japanese private firm invest a lot in China mainland and also in Taiwan. But those Japanese private firms' investment for China mainland is a bit allocated for alternative places like the Southeast Asia or in last 10 years to reduce its vulnerability. And they intentionally, and our government intentionally guide them to that. So I think that the vulnerability to the exposure in China is obviously much less than before, I think. But the point would be much broader thing, I think. So many semiconductors concentration on Taiwan is there, and also we Japan have to secure our sea lane, and in that context, the stability in this region is quite important. But the Chinese ambition is there, so that we have to make U.S.-Japan alliance effective much more in a context of the real practical operation. And also we need to invite many of our friends like Australia or UK or other countries that have the military asset capacity and have the commitment or the interest in East Asia. And those kind of the effort would minimize the real war possibility, and that is the very important approach for us, I think.
Absolutely, it's something we've talked a lot about here. It's the importance of deterring Chinese aggression, because if we can deter war, then we don't have to worry so much about the security of our sea lanes for shipping, whether it's food or energy or things of that sort. One of the things that the United States just recently published, the Biden administration just recently published its national security strategy, and it talks about working with allies and partners. And I know the Kishida administration is going to be releasing its own national security strategy as well soon. And I suspect that just like new capitalism, economic security will play a major focus in that. Economic security, of course, talking about not being over reliant on one market and having the accessibility of goods in a reliable fashion. So it's one of the things many Japan watchers are looking forward to reading when that comes out. But before we close out, I just want to ask if you had any final thoughts, either on how to make Japan's economy more competitive, or just any recommendations that you may have for the U.S.-Japan alliance.
Okay, so well, now thank you very much for today's opportunity. I really appreciate it, and I think that we Japan had a history that even the economic administration is not good. We made a very aggressive change after that. That is Japanese history. So that I think that with Japan now, I think that most of the people recognize that we need the reform and we need to change our society and we need to adjust this Japan for the kind of much innovative and open and competitive land. So that I think that the reform, structural reform of the Japanese society, Japanese economy is likely, I think, and I do my best in the context. So I focusing on tackling the three traps. That is my top agenda. And at the same time, because Japan is now facing the situation that the possibility of the war in Japanese territory or in Japanese EEZ or in East Asia, is I think that is closing to the highest level after World War II, I think. So that in that context, US-Japanese alliance should be the very important key cornerstone, I think. But I have to say that one is the US withdrawal from TPP, and second is the kind of the lack of the military commitment for Ukraine that lead Asian leaders or the people kind of the concern that would US really have the strong will to commit to Asia in both contexts of the military or economy. And I personally believe that US have the very strong commitment to play that role. So I believe and I hope that the US-Japan alliance would work as a kind of the very important anchor to keep the stability or the safety of the East Asia for foreseeable future. Well, thank you.
No, that's a great ending. I think there's definitely a bright future for the U.S.-Japan alliance.
Yep.
Well, thank you again for joining us. This has been wonderful. I hope we can have you back, soon. To all of our viewers, thank you for joining us. Again, I'm Riley Walters at Hudson Institute. I look forward to seeing you next time.